Hi, my name is Rachel Hampton, a graduate student here at EKU, and today I want to talk about the research that I did involving my thesis for my master's degree. This thesis kind of presents an argument about the need for better educational practices for Appalachian students. And through this research, I've determined that the current practices allow no room for these students to use and embrace their own language. So I investigated the responses of Appalachian people regarding their perception of Appalachian English, their experience in writing classrooms, and their exposure to Appalachian literature, which kind of helped me establish that as students, they are negatively impacted by the current treatment of their language. So I'm going to break this down into the following sections. First is the Appalachian problem. So why is standard English valued and Appalachian English overlooked? Next is Appalachian English. How can we define this language for it to be used in writing classrooms? Next is asking Appalachia. So what do Appalachian people have to say about their experiences in writing classrooms, and what can we learn from it? And then finally, best practices for Appalachian instructors. So what changes can instructors make to value and better the experiences of Appalachian students in writing classrooms? But before I get started, I want to talk about my inspiration to complete this project because I think it does provide insight into what many Appalachian students face. So during my first year at EKU, I took an Appalachian Studies course where, for the first time, I read a novel by an Appalachian author, and this was Trampoline by Robert Gopp. And this was really a life-changing experience because Gopp integrates Appalachian English into his novel. And at that point, I had never seen my dialect written out on a page before, let alone written out in a published book. And then further, through my graduate studies at EKU, I learned a lot about composition pedagogies and the difference between standard and non-standard language. So traditionally, writing instructors think that if students cannot conform to a standard language, they will not be successful in their professional lives and academic endeavors. However, the negligence of instructors to acknowledge Appalachian English causes students to lose the ability to use this language and may negatively affect their perceptions of themselves. I did not understand the complexity of my own language because it was not taught in my classes, and I'd never encountered Appalachian literature until my post-secondary education. So at that point, it was then my responsibility to focus my studies to learn more about myself, my culture, and how I'm affected by it. And I feel students shouldn't have to go through this. This should not be the typical experience for these students, but unfortunately, this is what my research supported. So this led me to want to find a way for students to be able to use and express their own language while still being able to be successful in their professional and academic lives. And I think there's no better way to do that than to ask the Appalachian people. My cat wants to be in my presentation. So I agree that students do need to learn how to write for a professional audience for like job applications, publications, and documents for their future careers. However, the way that standard English is taught and valued over students' own language is really harmful to the student. This gives into negative stereotypes that surround the region, and unfortunately to many, Mountain Talk is widely considered to be the dialect of the illiterate, the uneducated, and the poor. So these perceptions about Appalachian people would change if we could see more Appalachians using their dialect proudly in academic and professional roles. And at the core of it, I've found this problem to exist because Appalachian people are an invisible minority. So according to Sherry Powers in the article, Real Ways of Talking and School Talking, Appalachian people are predominantly white, but they are discriminated against due to the differences in their culture and the mainstream culture. So the use of Appalachian English is really an immediate way people are identified as being Appalachian. And this kind of invokes the application of those negative stereotypes onto dialect speakers. And Shelby in the article, The R Word, What's So Funny and Not So Funny About Redneck Jokes, describes how this discrimination comes to Appalachian people in the most unexpected moments. Unlike the mountains, which can be seen from some distance, stereotypes jump out at you in ambush, at parties and meetings, at dinner with friends, from movies, from magazines and newspapers, from your favorite TV show, and even in college classes. So the teaching of standard English attempts to separate Appalachian students from the stigma, but my findings suggest that this does more harm than good for these students. So just as understanding stereotypes can lead to a thoughtful discussion and prepare Appalachian people to fight against them, the understanding of Appalachian English can do the same. So therefore, Appalachian people should be taught about their language to deepen their understanding of it, and this will also give them an ability to discuss it with others and educate others. So we can look to the work of other scholars to help us determine and define how to teach and kind of break down this complex language, a surprisingly complex language. And a good example of this is author Troy D. Smith's impressive blog post, How to Speak Southern Appalachian. So this presents the language in an expansive list of rules, vocabulary terms, and also like pronunciations. And it does so in a way that really honors and respects Appalachian English. So very cool for me to find. So in this post, Smith breaks down common terms, verb usage, and pronunciation that separates Appalachian English from the standard language. So for example, wasper is wasp, tote is to carry, boggin or toboggan is a nip cap. I always hear my accent get much thicker when I go over these. And also verbs can have different tenses. So for example, ruin in the past tense is going to be learnt. And in my own experience, I really just do this to any word that I can. So I say stuff like learnt, sound, burnt, just to name a few. And this is just a few examples from this blog post and this expansive list found there, but it really illustrates how Appalachian English is a complex language, and identifying the rules of this language can really help students understand it better and have informed conversations that push against common stereotypes regarding the language. So for this project, I wanted to get a broad understanding of how Appalachian people perceive themselves and their language based on their time in writing classrooms. So this data was collected via an electronic survey, and it focused on the particular aspects of experiences, which are as follows: about you, perception of Appalachian English in writing classes, Appalachian literature, and final responses. So the majority, 84.5% of participants in the study, openly identify themselves as Appalachian. Though they are mostly located in eastern Kentucky, a few of my respondents were from West Virginia. Education was one of the most varied demographics of the study. 2.8% reported some high school education, 4.2% reported a high school diploma or equivalent, 17.4% reported some college with no degree, and a whopping 73.2% of participants had obtained college degrees. However, 78.9% reported the fear that others may think negatively about them based on their use of Appalachian English. When asked about stereotypes regarding the dialect and accent, the most common answers were ignorant, poorly educated, stupidity, incompetence, dumb hillbilly, and other similar terms. When asked about situations where they may or may not use Appalachian English, 87.3% of them responded that they find themselves using this language more when around other Appalachian people. Further, 72.8% found themselves suppressing their accent or dialect when around non-Appalachian people or when in formal settings. So this shows that the stereotypes placed against Appalachian people are simply not true for the entire region, but the stigma surrounding them takes away the confidence in their use of their language, which for me is a big problem. So when asked about their experiences in writing classes, 52.1% reported being harshly corrected for their use of Appalachian English, while only 12.7% reported being praised for it. One student described how an interaction with a writing instructor caused them to begin to suppress their Appalachian English. And this student can be quoted as saying, "A well-meaning instructor kindly corrected my use of holler in place of hollow in a creative nonfiction piece. The instructor went on to explain to me that I had so much potential, but no one would take me seriously if I didn't work the accent out of my writing and speech." This was not uncommon, unfortunately. And not surprisingly, 43.2% of respondents said that the way they were educated regarding Appalachian English negatively impacted their perception of their accent and dialect. So this proves that we need instructors to have a greater understanding of the complexity of the Appalachian language so that they may better respect it. Harshly criticizing students has a lasting effect on them, a lasting negative effect about how they perceive themselves and their language. So when asked about Appalachian literature, 66.2% said they encountered it in school, with most exposed to it later on in their education. Of those who have read Appalachian literature, 77.2% said it gave them a better understanding of Appalachian culture and or Appalachian English. So this illustrates that Appalachian literature is valuable in educating students about their culture and their language. And the earlier we can get students reading Appalachian literature, the sooner they will have their language and culture validated through accurate representations of themselves in the literature. And finally, all of the sections of the survey had optional short answer responses so that they could provide extra info if they wanted to. And every section of the survey received an outpour of pride about how just elated people are to be from Appalachia. Some of these responses are proud of my heritage. I'm so proud to be an Appalachian and know we are a unique people. I'm so proud of my accent and it's a large part of who I know myself to be. I am grateful for my Appalachian roots and way of life. And finally, my favorite, Appalachia equals cool. And these are only a few of these amazing responses. So this shows that the people of Appalachia are very proud of their culture and language, and they deserve better educational practices that will help them better embrace this aspect of their identities. So as established throughout this project, the current situation for Appalachian students could be improved to give them better control over their use of Appalachian English. This should start in the writing classroom, where instructors should better value Appalachian English and give students the opportunity to learn about their non-standard language use in a broader sense. The negative effects that respondents have identified through the survey really could be minimized if we had different pedagogical practices involving Appalachian students. So at the core of this pedagogy, students should not be told that how they use language is wrong, but instead they should be taught to use standard English in addition to their own language. In order to honor students' own languages, instructors should look toward dual lingual education enacted by instructors of bilingual students, an approach I haven't really seen much about yet. But having a very language-informed and conscious classroom will give students a better understanding of how they operate as dialect speakers and how they may be perceived by those who do not speak Appalachian English. Since Appalachian English speakers are often harshly criticized for their dialect, accent, and writing, instructors should take care when assessing student work. So if they are harshly criticized during writing assessment, they could become discouraged and feedback could actually become a barrier for them to improve and can give them these negative perceptions about themselves. Next, the teaching of code meshing will allow students to practice their right to their own language while blending it with standard English in order to meet professional standards and goals. And according to Saidi and Richardson in their article, A Black Lives Matter and Critical Race Theory Informed Critique of Code Switching Pedagogy, code meshing is a valuable way to incorporate students' language practices, literacies, and cultures into the classroom as a tool they can use in their life and endeavors that go beyond the classroom. So it's something that will help them out in the rest of their life. Respondents to my survey were also very aware of negative stereotypes that exist about the region, so it's important to expose Appalachian students to positive examples of their culture through Appalachian literature. This will also allow students to read and share representations that are accurate, but also to differentiate their own lives from those negative, exaggerated portrayals that we usually see in popular culture. I believe Appalachian literature is best used in classrooms as students can actually use these texts as foundations to base their own work. So creative writing can also be a useful tool because it's important in the development of students using dialects Because when we write creatively, we can do so with any purpose in mind, right? So this means that students will have much more liberty to express themselves and vary their language with these assignments. So in conclusion, my study has identified a need for pedagogical changes for Appalachian students. Through my primary research, I've identified that Appalachian people are very proud of their culture and language, but these negative stereotypes that are associated with their accent and dialect really take away their confidence in being able to use that in public and formal settings. So when coupled with this negligence of the language in writing classes, Appalachian people feel pressure to suppress their accent and dialect in order to conform to social standards. But with a more Appalachian-focused pedagogy, this problem can be helped by giving students the ability to have informed conversations and the ability to better blend their own language with the standard to ensure their success. Appalachian people and their language are very unique, and I believe more can be done for them, starting with Appalachian English in the writing classroom. Thank you.